In 1967, Chevrolet faced a problem. Ford was dominating Trans Am racing with the Mustang. The rulebook capped displacement at 5 liters. Chevy's 327 was too big. Their 283 was too weak. So they built something new, an engine that screamed to 7,500 RPM, burned oil by design, and won races nobody thought a Camaro could win. This is the story of the 302 and how it became the most focused small-block Chevrolet ever built. The first time a 302 fired to life in anger, it didn't sound like a street engine. It crackled with high-strung urgency, somewhere between a small block and a Formula car. The exhaust note climbed faster than the tachometer could follow. By 4,000 RPM, the engine was singing. By 6,000, howling. And at 7,000, the red line most production V8s never touched. The 302 was just getting started. This was Chevrolet's answer to a rulebook it didn't write and a rivalry it couldn't ignore. In the mid-60s, Trans Am racing demanded something Detroit hadn't prioritized: handling, real handling. Road courses with elevation changes and technical corners where aerodynamics mattered as much as horsepower. Ford showed up with the Boss 302 Mustang. Chrysler brought the AAR Cuda. Chevrolet had the Camaro Z28, built around an engine that shouldn't have worked. The 302 wasn't the biggest small block. It wasn't the most powerful or reliable, but it was the most focused. Every component, every compromise, every decision pointed toward one goal: winning races at 7,000 RPM while staying legal under a 5-liter displacement cap. It combined a short-stroke crank from the 283 with big-bore cylinders from the 327. Solid lifters, when hydraulic was easier. Heads designed for engines twice its size, all because the rulebook said they had to build 1,000 street versions to go racing. The result redefined what a small block could do. It gave the Camaro a weapon that could dance with Mustangs in corners and outrun them on straights. It turned a pony car into a legitimate road racing machine. It proved that in the right hands, displacement wasn't everything. Execution was. Walk up to a Z28 at idle and you'd think something was broken. The engine shook. The whole car vibrated. The lope from the camshaft was so aggressive the tach needle bounced at every stoplight. Press the throttle below 3,000 RPM and nothing happened. The engine felt lazy, asthmatic, waiting for something. Then you'd cross 4,000 RPM and everything changed. The 302 transformed. What felt sluggish became violent. The engine pulled harder with every 100 RPM. The sound changed from rumble to scream. By 6,000 RPM, you weren't driving a Camaro, you were piloting something that belonged on a track, not a public road. That transformation was the 302's signature. It lived in a power band street drivers rarely visited. It demanded commitment. You couldn't short shift it or baby it. You had to wind it out, hold gears longer than felt comfortable. Trust the engine would keep pulling when instinct said to shift. Most drivers never discovered what the 302 could do because they never pushed hard enough. But the drivers who did understood. They understood Chevrolet had built an engine for a specific purpose and refused to compromise. That the rough idle and lack of low-end torque weren't flaws, they were the cost of having a production engine that could run 7,000 RPM all day. This is the story of innovation born from restriction, performance carved from compromise, and the engine that made Chevrolet's smallest small block its most legendary. Picture this. 1966. American motorsport is fragmenting into tribes. NASCAR owns the ovals. Drag racing owns the straight line. But a new battleground is emerging, one rewarding handling as much as horsepower. It's called the Trans-American Sedan Championship, and it's about to change how Detroit builds performance cars. Trans Am isn't like other series. The rules are strict. Sedans only. 5 liters maximum displacement. 2 doors, 4 seats, production-based engines. And the kicker, you must build 1,000 street versions before the race car is legal. It's homologation racing, European style, on American soil. Ford sees the opportunity first. They're committed to total performance, Lee Iacocca's mandate to win everywhere. The Mustang is their golden child, and Trans Am is the perfect stage. They start engineering a race-ready variant before the ink on the rulebook dries. Chevrolet is caught off guard. The Camaro just launched as GM's Mustang fighter, but it's built for the street, comfortable, composed, civilized. The base small block is a 327, smooth and torquey, but 5 liters is 305 cubic inches. The 327 displaces 327, it's over the limit. The 283 is underbuilt for competition. Chevrolet doesn't have a legal Trans Am engine, and Ford is already testing at Riverside. Inside GM's engineering ranks, a small team begins sketching solutions. Vince Piggins in product performance. Zora Arkus Duntov watching from Corvette. Engineers who know if Chevrolet sits out Trans Am, the Camaro's reputation will be written by Ford press releases and Mustang victory laps. The problem is displacement. Too much and you're illegal. Too little and you're slow. The sweet spot is 302 cubic inches just under the wire, but GM doesn't make a 302. They'd have to build one from scratch, using only existing parts because there's no budget for an all-new engine. So they start calculating bore times, stroke times, cylinder count, combinations that add up to legality, mixtures of components that might survive 7,000 RPM, trade-offs, balancing power against reliability. Knowing the street engine will suffer for what the race engine demands, the solution emerges slowly. Take the 283's crankshaft, 3 inches of stroke. Made it with the 327 cylinder block and its 4-inch bores. The displacement works out to 302.4 cubic inches. Legal? Barely. But the real genius isn't the displacement, it's what the short stroke geometry enables. Short stroke means less piston travel per revolution. Less travel means less time per cycle. Less time means higher possible RPM before components fail. And higher RPM means more power peaks, even with less displacement. Physics also becomes a problem. Short stroke creates higher piston speeds relative to crankshaft rotation. Higher speeds mean more violent forces at the wrist pin. More force means faster wear. The 302 would be powerful but fragile. Race teams could rebuild between events. Street customers would be less understanding. The stakes are real. Lose Trans Am and the Camaro becomes the car that couldn't beat the Mustang where it mattered. Win and Chevrolet proves they can build a driver's car. This isn't about quarterly earnings, this is about pride. And in 1967, pride demanded a 302. The 302 was a Frankenstein engine, and that was the point. Chevrolet didn't have time to design a new block or engineer new internals. They had a parts catalog, a displacement target, and Ford breathing down their neck. Everything else was creative accounting with existing components. The foundation was the standard small block V8, the same basic design powering Corvettes since 1955. Proven, tough, infinitely modifiable. But the recipe was anything but standard. Start with the bottom end. They pulled the crankshaft from the 283 3-inch stroke short and light, then married it to the 327 cylinder bores 4 inches across. Big bores allow bigger valves. Bigger valves move more air. More air at high RPM means more power where Trans Am races are won. The math works out to 302.4 cubic inches, legal by a razor's edge. Chevrolet fitted it with double hump cylinder heads from the high-performance 327. Larger ports, bigger valves, 2.02-inch intakes, and 1.6 0-inch exhausts. The ports were straight and smooth, minimizing turbulence. The combustion chambers were compact, promoting complete burn and high compression. These were race-bred components adapted for street legality. The valvetrain was pure competition, solid lifters instead of hydraulic. When hydraulic lifters compress at high valve spring pressures, they lose control. Valves don't fully close. Power drops, engines fail. Solid lifters are mechanically rigid, no oil cushion, no compression, no float. The trade-off is noise and maintenance. They clatter at idle. They require adjustment. Every few thousand miles, but they work. The camshaft was aggressive, long duration, high lift, significant overlap. The cam profile made the engine lumpy at idle and lazy below 3,000 RPM. Vacuum hovered around 7 inches, barely enough for power brakes. Fuel metering was inconsistent because carburetors rely on vacuum, but above 4,000 RPM, the 302 transformed. The cam profile lined up with port velocity, valve timing synced with exhaust scavenging, and the engine wasn't just running, it was screaming. Long duration meant more time for cylinders to fill, high lift meant bigger flow paths. Overlap meant exhaust pulses helped pull in fresh intake charge. According to period tests, the production 302 made around 290 horsepower at 5,800 RPM. That number is conservative, insurance fiction. Dyno results suggested closer to 350 in race trim, maybe 400 with proper exhaust and tuning, but the number that mattered wasn't peak horsepower, it was where the power lived. The 302 made its best power between 6,000 and 7,500 RPM, a range most American V8s never visited. The short stroke was both genius and curse. It allowed astronomical RPM, but created a mechanical nightmare. A piston in a 302 travels nearly as fast as a piston in a 427 at the same RPM, despite moving shorter distance. The piston must accelerate and decelerate more violently to reverse direction in less distance. Those forces hammered wrist pins, stressed connecting rods, and punished bearings. The factory-forged pistons helped, but even forged aluminum has limits. The pink connecting rods, named for their distinctive coating, were stronger than standard but not indestructible. Bearings wore faster because they handled higher loads per revolution. Chevrolet knew the engine was fragile. They knew it would burn oil, rattle at idle, and demand constant maintenance. But they also knew none of that mattered if the Camaro won races. Homologation wasn't about building a perfect engine. It was about building a legal one that could win on Sunday and somehow survive on Monday. The oiling system was upgraded. Higher volume oil pump, windage tray to prevent oil starvation during cornering. Revised pan bind baffles. Cooling was borderline adequate. The 302 ran hot by design. High compression and aggressive timing created more heat. Small displacement concentrated that heat in less metal. Cast iron conducts heat poorly compared to aluminum. Every revolution above 7,000 RPM was a small victory against physics, and a reminder that racing doesn't care about your oil change interval. The 302 was born for the track, but it had to survive the street, and that's where problems started. Chevrolet needed to build 1,000 Z28 Camaros to satisfy Trans Am homologation. That meant putting race-bred 302s into the hands of regular customers who expected smooth idle, reliable starts, and no rebuilds every 20,000 miles. It was a recipe for disaster. The cam made the engine idle like it had a misfire, rough, uneven, shaking the whole car. The lope was so pronounced you could count individual cylinder firings. Vacuum was nearly non-existent at low RPM, which meant power brakes barely worked and fuel metering was inconsistent. Drivers unfamiliar with high-performance engines thought something was broken. They took cars back to dealers demanding fixes. There was no fix. The engine was working exactly as designed. It just wasn't designed for normal driving. Service departments were caught in the middle. Customers arrived angry, convinced they'd been sold defective cars. Mechanics ran diagnostics and found nothing wrong. The rough idle was intentional. The lack of vacuum was a side effect of cam profile. The whole car shaking at stoplights was what happened when you built an engine for 7,000 RPM and tried running it at 700. Service bulletins explained the Z28 required spirited driving to perform properly. Corporate speak for stop babying it and drive it hard. But most customers hadn't bought a Z28 to go racing. They'd bought it because it looked like a Camaro SS with racing stripes. Then there was oil consumption. The 302 burned oil by design, not defect. High RPM operation and loose piston-to-wall clearances meant oil made its way past rings and into the combustion chamber. Owners found levels dropping a quart every 1,000 miles, sometimes faster. Some accused Chevrolet of selling defective engines. Engineers knew why. Tighter piston clearances would have reduced oil consumption but increased friction and heat. At 7,000 RPM, that friction becomes catastrophic. Pistons expand with heat. Tighter clearances mean pistons seize in bores. So Chevrolet ran looser clearances and accepted oil consumption. Race teams understood this trade-off. Street customers did not. The solid lifter valvetrain required adjustment every 3,000 miles, routine for a race car, unacceptable for a daily driver. Most customers ignored it. Then they wondered why engines developed valvetrain noise, or worse, dropped a valve. A valve that doesn't close fully burns. A burned valve drops into the cylinder. A dropped valve destroys pistons, punches holes in cylinder walls, and turns an engine into scrap metal. And then there was heat. The 302 ran hot. Really hot. Small displacement and high compression meant more thermal energy concentrated in smaller space. Aggressive cam timing reduced exhaust scavenging efficiency at low speeds, trapping heat in the heads. Cast iron block and heads conducted heat poorly. Add stop-and-go traffic or a hot summer day, and the 302 would overheat, boiling coolant and vapor-locking fuel lines. Cooling system failures became common. Warped heads, blown, gaskets, cracked blocks. These weren't isolated incidents. They were predictable outcomes of running a racing engine in street conditions. The radiator that worked fine on a track with constant airflow couldn't cope with 15 minutes idling in traffic. Dealers started refusing warranty claims. Chevrolet issued bulletins explaining proper Z28 operation, but they read like race car maintenance manuals. Check oil before every drive. Adjust valves every 3,000 miles. Don't idle for extended periods. Monitor coolant temperature. These weren't suggestions, they were survival requirements. The 302 demanded attention, knowledge, and commitment. Most owners didn't sign up for that. Inside Chevrolet, engineers watched complaints pile up and knew they'd made the right choice for the wrong product. The 302 was perfect for Trans Am. It was winning races, proving the Camaro could run with Mustangs. Mark Donohue was lapping Riverside faster than Ford's factory Mustangs. Roger Penske's team was dominating, but every street car that came back with a blown engine chipped away at credibility. Every angry customer told friends. Every warranty claim cost money. The market answered with sales figures. Z28 production stayed low. Most buyers chose the big block SS or sensible small block alternatives. The 302 was too hardcore for the masses, too fragile for casual enthusiasts, too expensive to maintain for anyone not committed. In 1967, Chevrolet built just 602 Z28s, barely over homologation minimum. But on the track, the 302 was untouchable. The street cars struggled. The race cars soared. Two versions of the same engine living parallel lives. How did an engine too difficult for the street become a legend? Because sometimes being the best at one thing matters more than being good at everything. The press didn't know what to make of the Z28. Car and Driver tested one in 1967 and came away confused. They praised the handling, the Camaro carved corners like nothing else in its class. They admired the engine's top-end rush, the way it pulled past 6,500 RPM without hesitation. But they also noted the rough idle, the lack of low-end torque, the quirks that made the Z28 feel unfinished. "This is a race car with license plates," they wrote. It wasn't entirely a compliment. They couldn't recommend it for normal driving, but they couldn't stop thinking about it either. Road and Track understood what Chevrolet was attempting, a homologation special built to satisfy rulebook requirements, not customer expectations. "If you want comfort, buy an Impala," they concluded. "If you want to win races, buy this." Motor Trend focused on numbers, 0 to 60 in 7.2 seconds, quarter mile in 14.8 at 101 miles per hour. Skid pad numbers that embarrassed Corvettes. The Z28 wasn't the fastest Camaro in a straight line. The SS 396 had that covered, but it was quickest through corners and most composed under braking. But race wins don't pay bills, street sales do. And in 1967, the Z28 moved slowly off dealer lots. Chevrolet built just 602 Z28s that first year, barely clearing homologation minimums. The car was expensive at $3,200 base, compromised in daily driving, and poorly understood by the sales force. Most Camaro buyers chose the SS 396. The Z28 remained a niche product, appreciated by racers and misunderstood by everyone else. On the track, though, the 302 was everything Chevrolet hoped. Mark Donohue and Roger Penske campaigned a Z28 in Trans Am with brutal efficiency. The car was light, balanced, and powered by an engine that thrived in exact conditions Trans Am demanded: long straights, followed by hard braking into technical corners, sustained high RPM operation, and zero tolerance for weight or inefficiency. Donohue won race after race, outdueling Ford's Mustangs and proving the Camaro wasn't just styling. The Penske Z28 used a modified 302 pushing boundaries of production-based. Blueprinted internals, ported heads, custom headers. Race teams exploited every gray area in the rulebook. The result was an engine making close to 400 horsepower at 7,500 RPM. By 1968, the Z28 had won the Trans Am Manufacturers' Championship. Chevrolet's gamble paid off, at least in competition. Donohue took the Drivers' Championship. The Camaro beat the Mustang on road courses across the country. Racing success started changing perceptions. Enthusiasts who dismissed the Z28 as rough and unfinished began seeing it differently. This wasn't a flawed product, it was a purpose-built weapon. The rough idle wasn't a bug, it was proof of intent. The high-strung nature wasn't poor engineering, it was uncompromising focus. Sales climbed. In 1968, Chevrolet built 7,199 Z28s. By 1969, production more than doubled to 20,302 units. The Z28 was becoming a cult icon, a symbol of what happened when a manufacturer cared more about winning than mass appeal. The car attracted younger, more enthusiastic buyers willing to accept quirks in exchange for capability. The aftermarket embraced the 302. Speed shops developed upgrade paths, better headers, higher flow carburetors, roller rockers, forged internals. The 302's architecture lent itself to modification because it was already nearly race spec from the factory. But the 302 was already living on borrowed time. Emissions regulations were tightening. Insurance companies were cracking down on high-performance cars. GM's internal politics were shifting away from racing. The world the 302 was built for was disappearing. In 1970, Chevrolet bored the engine out to 350 cubic inches for the second-generation Z28. More displacement, more torque, more streetability, hydraulic lifters, milder cam, lower compression. The new engine was objectively better for normal driving. It was also less special. The 302's razor-edge compromise, the thing that made it difficult and demanding and unforgettable, was gone. Fewer than 20,000 total 302-powered Z28s were built between 1967 and 1969, a tiny fraction of total Camaro production. The 302 existed for exactly 3 model years and then vanished. But history has a habit of rediscovering what it once discarded. By the late 1970s, muscle cars were dead. Insurance rates, emissions laws, and fuel crises had killed them. The Camaro survived, barely. The Z28 nameplate returned in 1977 after a 3-year hiatus, but the engine under the hood was a shadow, a smog-choked 350 making 175 horsepower, less than a modern minivan. The high-revving, solid-lifter fury of the 302 was a memory, but memories become myths, and myths have value. Collectors started noticing early Z28s in the 1980s. These weren't flashy big-block Camaros with hood scoops. These were sleepers, understated cars with cowl induction hoods, rally wheels, and an engine that only revealed its nature above 4,000 RPM. People who'd owned them knew and understood their quirks began holding on. People who'd dismissed them began wishing they hadn't. Values started climbing. Not dramatically, the Z28 wasn't a Hemi Cuda or Boss 429, but steadily. Enthusiasts recognized the 302 for what it was. The last time Chevrolet built an engine purely for racing, and damn the consequences. Before emissions, before insurance, before corporate caution. Restoration culture embraced the 302 with obsessive detail. Owners hunted for original double hump heads with correct casting numbers. They searched for date code correct blocks. They debated whether 67 models had slightly different internals than 69s. Every detail mattered because authenticity mattered. These weren't just mechanical questions, they were historical investigations, attempts to preserve knowledge about an engine that existed for less than 3 years. Online forums became repositories of technical data. The 302 community became scholars of their own history. The 302's influence reached beyond nostalgia. When Chevrolet revived the Z28 nameplate in 2014 for the 5th-generation Camaro, they didn't just borrow the badge, they borrowed the philosophy. The new Z28 came with a naturally aspirated 7.0-liter V8, optimized for high RPM track use, not drag racing. It featured aggressive cooling, track-focused suspension, and deliberate compromises that made it difficult on the street. The modern Z28 was more capable in every measurable way. But the philosophy was identical. Build the best track car you can, and accept it won't be easy to live with. The 2014 Z28 cost $75,000 and came without a radio or sound deadening. It was a 302 in spirit. Even as the automotive world shifted toward turbocharging and electrification, the 302's core idea persisted. Specialization matters. Focus beats generalization. An engine built for one purpose and executed perfectly is worth more than an engine trying to do everything. Engine builders still reference the 302 when discussing small displacement, high RPM builds. The formula hasn't changed: short stroke for revs, big valves for flow, solid lifters for reliability at sustained high RPM. The 302 didn't invent these concepts, but it proved they could work in a production car. There's a romance to the 302 that transcends its actual performance numbers. Modern sports cars are faster, more reliable, easier to live with. A base Camaro SS today makes 455 horsepower, gets 25 mpg highway, and requires maintenance once a year instead of once a month. Progress is real, but progress costs something. The 302 sounded different. That high-strung mechanical wail is gone from the modern automotive landscape, replaced by muffled exhaust tones engineered to pass noise regulations. The 302 felt different. Every input mattered, every RPM was earned, every mile required attention. Modern cars isolate you from the machine. The 302 connected you to it. The surviving 302-powered Z28s are museum pieces now. Values have climbed from used car territory to serious collector status. A numbers-matching 69 Z28 in excellent condition brings $80,000 or more. Early 67 models command even higher prices. These aren't just old Camaros, they're artifacts from an era when racing shaped production cars in ways that seem impossible today. What the 302 proved was that displacement isn't everything. That clever engineering can overcome cubic inch disadvantages. That an engine built to do one thing exceptionally well will outlast engines built to do many things adequately. The sound of that engine wasn't just horsepower, it was defiance cast in cast iron and aluminum. A middle finger to displacement formulas and corporate caution. A reminder that sometimes the best answer to how much power do you need is how much can you use. What began as a homologation requirement became a legend long after the last 302 rolled off the assembly line. The first time a 302 fired to life in anger, it didn't sound like a street engine. By the last time one left the factory in 1969, it still didn't. That was always the point. The 302 was never meant to be easy, practical, or the engine you recommended to your neighbor. It was meant to win races and satisfy a rulebook. Everything else, street manners, maintenance intervals, customer complaints, was secondary. What makes the 302 legendary isn't that it succeeded despite its compromises. The compromises were the whole point. Chevrolet could have built a softer cam, tighter clearances, hydraulic lifters. They could have made the 302 civilized. They chose not to. They chose racing over refinement, focused over flexible. Because of that choice, the 302 became proof that sometimes the best machines refuse to compromise, that being great at one thing beats being good at everything, that an engine willing to sacrifice comfort for capability will outlast 1,000 engines designed by committee. Today, the few surviving 302-powered Z28s are treasures, not because they're rare, though only about 20,000 were built. Not because they're valuable, though they've become that, but because they represent a moment when a manufacturer looked at a rulebook and decided to build something uncompromising. The 302 didn't just make the Camaro competitive in Trans Am. It made a statement about what performance meant. That real speed requires real sacrifice. That the best engines aren't always the smoothest or quietest or most reliable. Sometimes they're the ones that shake at idle and burn oil and demand to be driven hard or not at all. If you've ever heard a 302 at full song climbing past 7,000 RPM with that mechanical shriek that sounds nothing like a normal small block, you understand. If you've ever driven a first-gen Z28 with the original engine and felt that high-strung urgency, that razor edge between power and destruction, the 302 was Chevrolet's smallest small block. It was also their greatest, not because it made the most power or lasted the longest or sold the most units, but because when Chevrolet needed an engine to prove the Camaro could dance with Mustangs on road courses, they built something so focused, so uncompromising, so purely dedicated to that single goal that it couldn't help but become legendary. The Chevy 302 was an overachiever not because it did more than expected, but because it did exactly what it was built to do, without apology, without compromise, and without a single concession to being anything other than a race engine that happened to come with a VIN. If you've ever owned one, driven one, or just stood next to one at full throttle, share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear what made your experience with the 302 unforgettable. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.